Hi, welcome to today's episode. In today's episode, we'll be exploring customer churn. I have a question for you. When was the last time you saw someone using a BlackBerry? If you're anything like me, when you were younger, BlackBerries were the phone to have. They were popular and everybody had them. But now you realize that not many people are using BlackBerries. What happened? We can describe what happened to BlackBerry as customer churn. Total number of their customers have significantly dwindled over time. This phenomenon is very worrisome for businesses because customers are the lifeline of businesses, and to ensure continued growth, businesses have to maintain a good relationship with customers. Once the customers start leaving, a business is likely to fail. So how can businesses identify or understand when their customers are going to churn? Well, they can do this with customer churn indicators. Customer churn indicators are simply various pointers that businesses can use to measure or tell whether their customers are likely to leave or not. For example, looking at the last time they purchased, looking at the number of website visits that they have, looking at whether they are opening their emails that are being sent to them. These are pointers that businesses can use to tell whether a customer is likely to churn or not. In today's episode, we have some data in our database which we'll use to create customer churn indicators for our fictitious business to help us understand whether our customers are likely to churn or not. Let's get into the...
We're currently in PHP admin, which is our database management system, and we are running PostgreSQL, which is our data manipulation language. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to explore our data in PHP admin. So on my left here, I have a drop-down menu. I go into my databases and I'm able to select the database in which I have kept my data. So SQL tutorials. So I go to schemas and go to public. Now under public, I have my tables here and I have my customer interactions data. Now the customer interactions data is the data that we have collected about our customers, which we are going to use to help to determine if a customer is likely to churn. So let's explore what is within the data. So to explore what is within your table, you use a selector command. So you do a select all with a star from, then you put in your table name. So our table name is customer underscore interaction underscore data version 2. So when we run this, down here we are able to see the various columns within our data table. So we have the name of our customer. We have the total purchases that they have made for the duration with which they have been a customer. We have the number of emails they've opened for the duration of which they've been our customer. We have the number of websites they visited, the number of support tickets they raised, and their customer ID. We also have their first purchase date, so the date on which they made their first purchase, and then the last purchase dates. Here we have calculated average values based on the main columns within the data set. So here we have the average date interval. The average date interval takes into consideration their last purchase dates and first purchase dates. So what we did here was we subtracted the last purchase date from the first purchase date, and then we found the interval between these two dates in terms of the number of days, and then we found the average of that number. For total purchases, we summed the total purchase column, which is right here, and found the average of the total purchases that they have made over time. We did the same thing for email open, website visits, and support tickets raised. So we are going to be using averages to help determine whether a customer is likely to churn or not. Why averages? Averages point to or help us understand the general behavior of the whole group that we have in our data set. So an average would help you understand what the general pattern or general behavior is like, and it's a good indicator for basically understanding how your data behaves generally. So that's why we are using averages. So to go into further detail, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through how we calculated these columns, and then from there I'm going to walk through how we are going to use the data from these columns to get our customer churn indicator. So let's go into this. So we are going to start by calculating the average date interval. So to calculate the average date interval, we used the first purchase date and the last purchase date, and we found the difference between these two dates in terms of days, and then found the average of that. So let's walk through this example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the last purchase date, I'm going to subtract it from the first purchase date. I need to put this in call. I need to surround these with these quotation signs and put them in quotes. So we subtract our last purchase date from our first purchase date, and then we select from our table. So whenever you are referencing something from a given table, you have to call that table name. So selected from our table. Then what we do is we find the average of this. So let's remove this and run this. So we have 730.5750000, which is slightly different from the value we got, because after doing this, what we did was we went a step further to round this by 2 decimal places. So we're going to do this here, where we round this off. Okay, version 2 as, so we are going to make this a subquery. A subquery is like a regular query, but with a subquery you can reference values from it. So the way that we are able to reference values from our data table, we are able to reference values from your subquery table. So again, we are going to do select, but before we do that, let us give this command a name. So we are going to call it as date interval. The reason why we need to name it is when we are referencing it, we need to be able to call it by something. So date interval is what we are going to call it by. So what we are going to do now is we are going to select subquery dot date interval from our subquery. So now our subquery is acting as our data table. Awesome. So let's not run this yet. Let's apply a round function. So round allows you to shorten the number of decimal places that you have in a given value. So I'm rounding this to 2 decimal places. So what's going to happen is, instead of having 730.575 with all these decimal places behind, we're going to shorten and have only 2 values. So we're going to end up with 730.58. So let's round this. Let's run this now and see what we get. So we have 730.58. This is the method with which we calculated our average date interval that we saw in the previous, when we previously queried our data table. Let's walk through an example of how we calculated our total purchases, our average total purchases. So similar to how we calculated our average date interval, we're going to maintain the structure, but we are going to change a little around. So PostgreSQL has an inbuilt average function. So you can supply the column that you want to get the average of to the average function, and it will calculate the average for you. So that's what we are going to do here. We are going to supply our total purchases to the average column here, give it a name, and then reference it from our main query to round it to 2 decimal places. So let's do that. we're going to name it average total purchases. And we're going to call it in this query. So we're going to select average total purchases from our subquery. And we see we have our value of 10.7. So we took this method or this formula and calculated the average for total purchases, email open, website visits, and support tickets raised. Great. Now let's go back into our data table and look at the columns that we have again. So let's talk a bit more about our averages. What do our averages represent in terms of the customer churn indicator that we are trying to build? So in terms of the date interval, our thought process is it's helping us to understand averagely the duration within which a customer makes a purchase from us. This will help us to understand their purchasing behavior and generally the way that they buy. So it could be that they buy occasionally, it could be that they buy frequently. So we want to use our average date interval to understand how they purchase and their purchasing behavior. With average total purchases, we want to understand generally how much do customers buy. With average email opens, we also want to understand generally how many emails from us do they open. It's a similar thing with website visits. We want to understand generally how many times do they visit our websites. And with support tickets, we want to understand again generally how many tickets they are raising. Now, the reason why support tickets is important is if a customer is raising a lot of support tickets, it might indicate a level of dissatisfaction with the product. So we want to know if they are okay with the product, or if they're satisfied with the product, or if they are not satisfied with the product. Now, on their own, none of these columns can be a great churn indicator. Rather, when we put these all together to build the indicator, it's more telling because with average dates interval, we can identify how frequently they purchase. And if they purchase infrequently, we can tag them as need to be engaged. If they are purchasing less than what our normal customer base is purchasing generally, again, we can tag them for more engagements. The same thing with email opens and website visits. If we realize that they are opening fewer emails and visiting our websites less, then we know that okay, we need to engage these clients. And for support tickets raised, if we realize they are raising more support tickets, that means they're having more challenges with the products, then we can tag them as probably dissatisfied and also would need to engage them. Okay, so now that we have these, it would be interesting to know which customers we need to engage and which customers are currently fine. So let's build on the average columns to create a column or to create extra columns that show whether a client needs to be engaged or the client is fine. So we are going to start with average date interval. Okay. So in PostgreSQL, we have a function called a case when statement. A case when statement can be used to set a rule. So for example, if A happens, then assign the value B. Or else if C happens, assign a value D. So we are going to use this case when function to create our new column. So in our So looking at our result set, we are able to see which customers need engagement and which customers are fine. We are going to apply the same logic for the rest of the average columns in our table. We've applied the same logic to the other average columns in our table, and they are in the code here. Let's look at the results. So we have individual tables for each case when statement that represents each average column. So for purchase engagement, which is representative of the total purchases that they've made, we are saying that, or we said that if the total purchases that they've made, that is here, if the total purchases that they've made is less than the value of the average total purchases, then the value needs engagement should be assigned. And here we see needs engagement. It's a similar thing for email opens. We are saying if the number of emails that they open is less than the number of average email opens, then assign the value needs engagement. It's the same thing for website engagements. For support tickets, we say if the number of support tickets that they are raising is more than the average number of support tickets a customer raises, then they are likely to be dissatisfied. So we see that in this column here. What we are going to do next is we are going to combine the logic of these individual case when statements and create a final case when statement that will serve as our customer churn indicator. With this, if a customer needs engagement across all channels and is also dissatisfied, then we are going to conclude that they are likely to churn. So let's do this. So combining all the logic, we get this final case when statement. We use the AND keyword to be able to join multiple conditions together. So we are joining the individual conditions into one condition, and the AND keyword allows us to join all the conditions into one. So let's run this. So here we have a final column that shows whether a customer is fine or likely to churn. So for instance, for this customer, we are saying that it's taking them longer to purchase than the average time that it takes a client to purchase. For purchase engagement, we are saying that they are purchasing less than the average total purchases that a client usually makes. We are saying they are opening fewer emails under email engagement than a customer averagely opens. They are visiting the website fewer times than a customer averagely visits the website, and we are saying they are raising more support tickets than a customer averagely does. That points to some levels of dissatisfaction. And so looking at all these metrics, we are saying they are likely to churn. This brings us to the end of this video. I hope this content has been helpful. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below and I'll respond. See you on the next one.